This is Green Street, the environmental health show, greenstreetnews.org, Patty and Doug Wood, and our worldwide network of experts here every week to help you navigate your way through this increasingly toxic world. Welcome back. In a few weeks, our kids will be heading back to school to spend a good part of their early lives in classrooms and on school grounds. Today on Green Street, we're going to be talking about some of the most common environmental exposures that occur in schools and how those exposures can be mitigated or even eliminated in a program we've developed called the ChildSafe School. So if you are or know a parent of a young child or know a teacher or school board member or principal or superintendent, please share this program with them. We're going to get to all that in just a minute, but first the environmental news stories of the week. Patty, what do you got for us this week?
More stuff going on in Washington. Or
Really?
not going on, as the case may be.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one is a federal judge orders Pentagon to lift the freeze on wind power. A federal judge this month ordered the Pentagon to lift its freeze on reviewing onshore wind projects and to end some of the delays that have brought U.S. wind power development to a standstill. Judge Karen Immergut of the U.S. District Court in Oregon issued a preliminary injunction in a lawsuit that a coalition of renewable energy groups filed against the Defense Department. The groups argued that the Trump administration has unlawfully delayed dozens of wind projects across the country by halting military reviews that were once considered routine.
It's funny, I don't think of the Defense Department as being the big obstacle to
Well, they have. Well, you'll see why. You'll see why. Yeah.
Okay.
She ordered the agency to resume reviewing wind projects and to report back to the court on its progress every 30 days while the broader legal case played out. Since April, the Pentagon has halted all military reviews of proposed wind farms, which are meant to ensure that the turbines don't interfere with radar or flight paths.
Okay, that's why they're involved.
Exactly.
Okay.
While the Trump administration has cited national security as a rationale, the coalition of renewable energy groups said the delays were an unjustified tactic to thwart wind power, a technology that Donald Trump has derided for decades.
You know, the rest of the world is passing us by when it comes to sustainable energy.
They're all over renewables.
Yeah.
They're moving forward into the future in the right way, and we're not.
It's going to we'll never catch up now.
In the past, wind projects have quickly received no hazard determinations, allowing them to move forward. But some projects do create issues, and they typically need to reach a mitigation agreement with the Pentagon.
Well, I get it. You know, they don't want the turbines to interfere.
We're not saying that this shouldn't happen. They've just stopped all these reviews.
Stop doing it.
They've stopped all the reviews, just complete stop. During oral arguments, lawyers for the Justice Department argued that the federal government was trying to assess potential national security risks from new wind projects, such as the possibility that the turbines could make it harder to detect drones, and that there were no political motives for halting wind power.
Of course not.
But lawyers for the renewable energy groups countered that developers had not received an adequate explanation for why many projects were stalled, and that even if some projects might pose concerns, a halt on all new wind turbines nationwide was too broad and affected projects that clearly were not a threat. Donald Trump doesn't like wind.
No,
power.
Donald Trump doesn't like wind.
Particularly wind power.
I get it, but you know, it's too bad. Like I say, it's going to take us decades to catch up.
That's right.
I have some news about baby mattresses. According to a recent study, certain kinds of children's mattresses release an array of harmful chemicals that can contaminate a child's sleeping environment, and more of those chemicals are released when babies are actually sleeping on them.
Right, because they're moving around.
Don't steal my punchline
Okay,
here.
sorry.
Researchers found 21 toxic chemicals that were released from the mattresses they tested, including phthalates, flame retardants, plasticizers, and other chemicals linked to endocrine disruption, neurotoxicity, and reproductive harm. These are babies that are sleeping on these mattresses. Interestingly, the weight, body temperature, and movement of the baby all increased the release of toxic chemicals. In other words, the exposures were higher when the babies were sleeping or lying on them. Wow. Labeling of children's mattresses is not mandatory, so consumers have no idea what's in the products they're purchasing. The mattresses in question tended to be the less expensive models, which researchers pointed out disproportionately impact low-income families. Okay, anyway, that's the news about baby mattresses. What else you got?
All right, so another thing about what's not being done in Washington.
Okay.
The EPA has backed off its reassessment of cancer-causing nitrates despite decades of research suggesting the contaminant is more harmful than previously thought and that nitrate pollution is at crisis levels in U.S. drinking water sources. The agency would not confirm or deny the assessment was canceled, but the work has been stagnant for more than 2 years, and the department responsible for it has been eliminated.
So they can't possibly be doing it.
Scientists and health advocates say regardless of whether it has been canceled or is just locked in a lengthy delay, Americans are paying the price with their health. The EPA set a threshold for nitrates in drinking water more than 30 years ago at a level designed to avoid harming babies after research showed that ingesting nitrates could trigger dangerously low oxygen in babies' blood.
Yeah, it's the blue baby syndrome,
That's
right?
exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
The EPA announced it would reassess nitrates and nitrites in 2017, but the work was suspended in 2019 by the first Trump administration. Earlier this year, the Trump administration eliminated the EPA's Office of Research and Development, which housed the Integrated Risk Information System and was responsible for performing these health assessments.
We know how to cut costs, don't we?
Nitrates can be naturally occurring, but nitrate pollution in waterways has been tied to heavy use of nitrogen-based fertilizers and the spreading of large amounts of livestock manure on farm fields as fertilizer. The current EPA nitrate threshold for nitrates under the Safe Drinking Water Act is 10 parts per million, a level that researchers and health advocates say is far too high to protect health. Studies have linked nitrate exposure below 10 parts per million to an increased risk of colorectal cancer, bladder cancer, thyroid disease, and other health problems.
So 10 parts per million is the limit, but they're finding all these health problems at below that limit.
Way below that limit,
man.
exactly. I mean, we have, not only do we have nitrates, but we've got PFAS, we've got 1,4-dioxane. I'm talking about the really big ones, right? We've got micro nanoplastics. I mean, all of these things need to be assessed, and there is no department to assess them.
No, we got rid of the department.
That's right. We got
saved
rid of
money.
the EPA's Office of Research and Development,
We got
which
rid of-
housed the Integrated Risk Information System.
We got rid of fraud and abuse and science while we were at it. All right. Thanks, Patty.
Oh, my goodness.
We have 54 million school-age children in this country, and they spend a lot of time in classrooms and other school facilities. This is at a time when their bodies are just developing, a critical window of development when environmental exposures can do maximum damage, when chemicals used in schools can find their way into tiny bodies and begin their troubling work. On today's show, we're going to be talking about some of the most common exposures that occur at schools and how they can be mitigated or even eliminated with a science-based program called the ChildSafe School. On the web at www.thechildsafeschool.org, the program is filled with scientific studies, policy ideas, videos, and other information that can help school boards, administrators, and facility directors make their schools as environmentally safe as they can be. The program was developed by our nonprofit Grassroots Environmental Education, and it all begins with the unique vulnerability of children. All right, Patty, so let's start with this. Why is it so important that schools are a safe place for kids?
Well, when you think of the amount of time that children spend in school, starting in kindergarten and going through 12th grade, it's about half of their waking hours during the school year.
It's a big part of their life.
It's a big part of their life.
Yeah.
And if that school environment has what we call chronic low-level exposures to certain chemicals that are found in cleaning products or pesticides or fragrances, there are things that are just used typically in a classroom on whiteboards and so on.
Markers. There's all kinds of chemicals. When you think about it, there's a lot of exposures in
Exactly.
school.
And floors in schools are cleaned with really toxic chemicals and also sealed with toxic chemicals.
Yeah,
And
you
so,
know what a school smells like when you walk in.
Yeah, you know what
after-
that school smells
Sure.
like, especially in the summer when they're doing all the floors,
Yeah, and
especially the gymnasiums and
floors
so
are all
on.
shiny
They're
and
pretty,
stuff, but
pretty
it smells.
stinky.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a child spends all this time in school, and they are typically putting their heads down on desks, lying on the story hour carpet,
Yeah.
where they have been tracking pesticides in from outdoors on the bottoms of their shoes from playing in gym or recess outdoors.
And kids sprawl on the floor in school.
And they
you see them,
sprawl
they do
on
their,
the floor
you know,
all
their,
the time.
Sure.
And, you know, they put things down on their desks and they pick them up and they, you know, put them in their mouths.
Yeah.
I remember when we did a video of a school classroom just to see how many children had this typical hand-to-mouth behavior. And it was actually a second grade classroom. And we thought, well, probably a few of the kids will do that. Every single child in that classroom of 23 kids had this typical hand-to-mouth behavior going on for the entire time we were there.
Yeah.
You know, they touch things and then they put their hands in their mouth, they put things in their noses, they wipe their eyes.
And they're not washing their hands.
They're not washing their hands.
Yeah.
They're touching things, picking things up off the floor.
Sure.
And so on. And then they have their snack, right? And so
Right.
typically they're not all going and washing their hands before their snack, except if
Yeah.
they have a very good teacher.
Or if they're in art classroom, sometimes after you've been using art materials, you
Yeah.
wash your hands, but
Yeah.
it's not typical.
But these types of exposures seem pretty innocuous. We all know what a school smells like. We all know that they're cleaning those schools every single day.
Yeah.
Unlike your home, right?
Yeah.
Where you're not spraying, you know, disinfecting products and you're not spraying all-purpose cleaners all over every surface every single day in your home.
Right.
That is happening in a school environment.
So it's like an occupational exposure for
Yes, it is.
for adults. right?
Absolutely.
A workplace exposure where we
Yep.
we have OSHA, right, that looks over.
Right.
So who's looking over the exposures in schools?
That's a good question. We've been in touch with the national organizations and with some of the PTAs in states around the country, and they are concerned to the point where they are looking at possible regulations about what kinds of products they can use in schools.
But this would vary from state to state, right? Because
Absolutely.
education is a state matter.
Yes,
So whatever that particular state decides to do, it's just for that state.
that's right.
The
And
kids
there
over
is
the-
a state ed department in every state,
Yeah.
and they look at everything. They're really the overseers of the school environments, indoors and outdoors.
Okay, so you mentioned cleaning products as being a significant kind of potential exposure. So let's talk a little bit about cleaning products. What are they using and what's your concern about them?
Well, as I just mentioned, there are cleaning products being used every single day. So let's just talk about what we know. We know that environmentally mediated illness is a growing and yet preventable public health threat.
When you say environmentally mediated, we're talking about environmentally caused.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly. So emerging science has linked many of these illnesses with exposure to chemical toxins, which has then precipitated this increased interest in schools and other facilities where children spend time. Children also spend a lot of time in daycare centers and in pre-Ks and in nursery schools and so on.
Sure.
Okay. So why are children at greater risk from exposure? Because they have immature and rapidly developing physiology, and they have these natural behavioral patterns that adults do not. Okay, they live in their environment the way adults do not either. They sprawl on floors, they play, they are, they have their heads down on table surfaces, they engage in this hand-to-mouth behavior, et cetera, et cetera.
They get into it.
That's right, they get into it. And that's what children do.
That's what they're
how
supposed to
they're
do.
supposed to learn
Sure.
about their environments. They learn about their environments through their senses, right?
Right.
They want to taste, they want to smell, they want to touch, and all of this is going on all the time, especially with the younger children.
Sure.
So pound for pound, children will take in more contaminants than adults. That increases their risk. So researchers have found that early exposures to environmental toxins are more likely to produce chronic disease than similar exposures encountered later in life.
This is so important.
You know, when you have a rapidly developing body and a lot of cell division going on, and there's some kind of an interruption in that normal developmental process, that could spell trouble.
You're setting the stage for problems later in life.
That's right. And studies also show that a developing fetus, of course, this is the most vulnerable, right? They are particularly at risk from the maternal exposures to certain chemicals. And this is really a concern for pregnant women
I was gonna say,
who work in schools.
a lot of teachers.
And there are a lot of young women right out of, their master's degree in education who are working in public
Elementary
schools or
sure.
who are working in schools.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they get married and they have children. And so you
Yeah.
find, it's pretty common in schools that you would have pregnant women working as
Yeah.
teachers. And also, as we said, most schools and child care facilities are cleaned every single day, and they leave behind these fresh residues of cleaning chemicals on the surfaces, which we know children come into direct contact.
So what's in these products that you're worried about? What kinds of things?
Well, some of the chemicals found in cleaning products become airborne too, and when used, they can trigger asthma attacks and possibly even contribute to the onset of the disease. So they use disinfectants. They're particularly harmful. These are known as quats, quaternary ammonium compounds, chlorine-based products like Clorox and so on,
Yeah.
and triclosan, which is in a lot of things. These are all disinfectants that are really quite toxic.
Well, I think a lot of,
Yeah.
they're antimicrobial, right? So that's their selling point is, we're going to
Yeah.
get rid of the antimicrobial.
I know. During COVID, there was just an unbelievable increase in the use of disinfectants.
Understandably.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the process of getting rid of the microbes, you're creating another potential danger for kids.
Yeah,
right?
another health risk.
Yeah. So how are kids in a typical classroom exposed to these chemicals?
Well, we just talked about, direct contact.
Right, so
Okay, so
that's-
that would be skin absorption.
Right.
Right, direct contact, skin absorption, then inhalation,
Right.
accidental ingestion when they're touching everything and then they have their snack or they eat their lunch and so on and they haven't washed their hands first. So these health impacts from cleaning products can result from either acute or chronic exposure. We're really concerned about the chronic low-level exposures. Chronic exposures can lead to asthma, allergies, certain types of cancer, learning and behavioral disorders, endocrine disruption, chemical sensitivity, kidney and liver damage. All the chemicals that are used in cleaning products and in products that we find in schools can lead to
Disease in the future.
That's exactly right.
So we have chemicals that we're using in cleaning products in schools that we know are linked to the development of cancer?
There are some chemicals that we know are carcinogens that are in products.
And we're using these in schools.
Yeah, but we're working on this. But I just have to mention fragrances because we talked about what a school smells like, right?
Yeah, right.
Everybody knows that smell.
Right.
Right, but fragrances are particularly problematic. Fragrances can be made up of more than 100 different chemicals to mimic something like rose or lemon or whatever. They're not really using real roses and real lemon. They're using a chemical mixture to make a particular scent.
They even call it lemon fresh.
I know,
It smells
I know.
lemon fresh. That shows you the power of advertising.
Exactly.
Wow.
Okay, but parents and school administrators should be aware that their decisions in this area, in other words, purchasing, right?
Yeah.
Purchasing cleaning products may have profound impacts on the health and well-being of students, and not only students, but school employees as well as teachers.
Okay, so what are people supposed to do?
Well, we have a program in New York State where we have advanced the use of bio-based cleaning products. This was actually an executive order.
Bio-based as opposed to petrochemical-based, right?
That's correct. Bio-based products have many fewer health problems associated with them. I mean, bio-based cleaning products are made from minerals, forestry, and marine products, plant, and so, they come from nature, right? And then they're used, and then they go back to nature when they go down the drain without harming anybody along the way.
Yeah.
And so that was the main takeaway from the work that was done in New York State for cleaning products in schools.
So bio-based cleaning products is what we want to use.
Correct.
And not use petrochemical-based cleaning products.
That's right.
But, people get used to what they're...
I know. And they get used to the smell.
They get used to the smell.
That's
they get,
right,
and
that
they,
artificial fragrance.
And they've got their, the custodial staff has their
That's
standard
right.
order.
And they have
by
their
the
suppliers.
Case. Yeah.
And that's right.
So it's tough to change that. So do you have specific recommendations on the ChildSafe School website?
The ChildSafe School website has specific recommendations for product manufacturers that provide bio-based cleaning products.
Okay, cool. All right, well, I want to talk about diesel exhaust for a second because diesel exhaust is a problem at a lot of schools. This is a very common sight where you've got school buses lined up at school, one behind the other, and their engines are running. And kids are getting on the buses. This mostly happens after school, where you've got this line of buses all in a row, and the kids are coming out and they're getting on the buses. And, you know, the tailpipe of one bus is right by the door
of the bus behind it. Exactly. You're filling the cabin of that bus behind it with diesel exhaust fumes, right?
Yeah. So, you know, little Johnny gets on the bus to go home, and he's been fine all day, and he comes home and he's got a bad headache.
Right.
Every day.
Right.
And his mother's going, well, what's going on? Well, you know, John Wargo at Yale University actually put an air monitor on a kid and sent him out for the day.
It was actually his daughter.
Was it? Well, and she came back, and they took that monitor to the lab at Yale, and they looked at the exposures. And
the timing.
There's exposures throughout the day, but at the end of the day, there's this giant spike.
Right.
And they're looking at, what the heck is that?
She got on the bus.
She got on the bus.
Right.
Full of this diesel
typical.
exhaust.
Just look at a school building at around 3:30 in the afternoon, whenever they let the kids out.
Right.
And you'll see this line of buses, and they just sit there idling.
So there is no safe level to exposure to diesel exhaust.
I know.
Okay?
I know.
Diesel exhaust is a proven cause of both asthma and lung cancer, and it's been linked to an increase in breast cancer because of the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, a word that I was taught by
PAHs.
Dr. Frederica Pereira, who did a lot of study on PAHs in New York City and their effect on people.
She was at Columbia.
She was great. Anyway, so we've got acute symptoms like headaches, dizziness, nausea, and then we've got chronic exposures, long-term exposures, like lung cancer.
I know.
So again, we've got something we know causes cancer, and we're exposing kids to it in schools. We could fix this. This is such an easy one to fix, okay?
Right.
This is a risk for not only for the kids, but it's a risk for the teachers, the staff, anybody that's around.
And the bus drivers.
And the bus drivers.
Of course.
Now, some states have laws that limit the time on idling, but, you know, try to enforce that, 3-minute idling. Who's out there with a stopwatch?
Nobody.
Nobody. So
and in the winter, it's also problematic because
they want to stay warm.
The drivers want to stay warm, and they want to keep the bus warm for the kids. Frankly, the kids are all dressed to go home, so they've got on their coats and their hats and their gloves and everything. They're all dressed, so they don't need to have a warm bus to get on.
Exactly. So this is a problem we can solve. On the ChildSafe School website, we've got sample signs. Really, it's just a matter of putting up signs at the school.
Right.
This is an idling-free zone. Turn off your engines.
Right. We did get state ed behind this initiative.
We did.
And so there are a lot of schools that I know of that have these signs which says no idling zone, turn off engines.
Yeah, I think a lot of schools have gotten the message.
Right.
One of the most effective ways we had was when we talked to the school bus monitors, linking the PAHs to increased risk of breast cancer.
Right.
And I remember we were making a movie about this, and I was waiting for the buses to come in, and turn off their engines. I had my camera set up right in front of where the bus was going to come in. So the bus comes in, and I'm waiting for him to turn off his engine, and he doesn't. And he's sitting there with the engine idling. And this, school monitor's mom comes racing, banging on the door. Shut your engine off.
Right.
Because she knew of the links to breast cancer.
And kids, as we know, kids are more vulnerable than adults to everything, including the exhaust from
Anyway,
diesel
this is
engines.
something you can do with a school policy, and I just want to mention that we have a sample school policy ready to go. All you need to do literally is print the thing off the ChildSafe School website and put in the name of your school and take it to your school board and say, can we have this policy?
Pass this policy?
The other thing that we found useful was for the bus drivers to have a sign on their dashboard.
Right.
That says,
just remind them.
Yeah, the Smithtown School District has a policy, no idling at schools, please turn off your engines.
Right. These are simple things, and they don't cost a school district a penny.
Zero.
Nobody.
Well, you got to get the signs, so a couple of $100 for signs. But
I'll pay for them.
Yeah, it's not something. Be careful now, Patty. Okay. We got a lot of people listening to the show. You don't want to volunteer. Anyway, this is a problem we could take care of.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, let's turn to turf pesticides, if you don't mind, and talk a little bit about these playing fields that are using turf pesticides and their dangers for kids.
Well, we can just talk about kids just the way we talked about them as far as cleaning products are concerned, because children are uniquely vulnerable to any toxic exposure because of their rapidly developing bodies and typical behavior and so on. And this is really important when you're talking about being outside on the grass, right, at a school. So studies have shown that lawn pesticides can easily find their way into the school.
They call it translocation, right? When you're moving a toxin from one place to another. Kids are out on the field, they're running around with their sneakers, they come right into the classroom.
Back into their classrooms, where in many cases, especially in elementary schools, they have like a little story hour where they have a little carpet in the corner of the classroom, and the kids come in and they, with their shoes, and they sit in the story hour. Then they lie on that carpet and they have stories read to them and blah, 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 blah. And so they actually accumulate in carpeting and in dust. Pesticides are designed to break down outdoors in sunlight and in rain and in soil microbial activity.
Right.
Okay, but they can remain active inside a school classroom for months. I mean, active.
Yeah,
so we have pesticides that are a risk for a long period of time inside a classroom that should never be inside a classroom, right? And they should never be on those lawns outside either.
Yeah, not to mention, when the kids are outside, they're rolling in the grass.
Right.
That's what kids do. Or they're sitting on the grass. Even older kids are sitting on the grass doing their homework. If there are pesticides on those on that grass, they're getting it through their skin, right?
That's right.
Thermal absorption.
That's right. But you should also teach children about those flags, and they even use them at schools because schools
pesticide
can
warning flags.
That's right, the pesticide warning flags.
Yeah.
Which basically says, stay off this lawn.
Right.
Right. And why do you think that flag is there? Because those pesticides are dangerous.
Yeah.
So, we are really focusing in the ChildSafe school on turf pesticides or lawn pesticides, right? We're not focusing on pesticides that are being used for structural damage, like for termites and so on. And we're not focusing on pesticides that are used in food preparation areas like the kitchens in the schools.
Right. A lot of that is health department stuff where you have to use it. That's health department stuff,
and they're concerned about roaches and so on and so on. Kids are not playing underneath the refrigerators or the stoves in a school kitchen.
Right.
So I am worried about them on the grass, and that's what we focus on at the ChildSafe school because they spend a lot of time outdoors during recess, after lunch, during gym. They're outdoors a lot, and if your school is using pesticides on that lawn, that's a real exposure issue.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, a lot of people say, well, they're registered with the EPA, so they must
Doesn't
be
mean
safe.
anything.
A registration with the EPA for a pesticide does not mean that it's safe or that the EPA has done any testing.
Or that the EPA has approved it. All they've done is they've taken the research that was done by the pesticide manufacturer themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, and they take that research, they look at it, and they say, okay, here's your stamp.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to give you a CAS number.
Yeah.
And you get that number, and you're ready to go.
Yeah. So you've registered it with the EPA.
Basically, it's registered, but it doesn't mean that the EPA...
Yeah, we had this discussion. We went to the EPA and kind of challenged them on this about why they're allowing children to be exposed to these things. And I remember the guy sat behind the desk and said, they are...
As long as they follow the label.
Yeah, they're safe when used as directed.
Yeah, that's
and I
right.
kept saying, but these are kids and they're different from adults. And he said, they're safe when used as directed.
I remember
I said,
that.
but this is not, these things can be really dangerous for kids to be exposed to. They're safe when used as directed. He said, like a little machine, just the same statement over and over. So I'll just mention that on the ChildSafe School website, we've got a Q&A about turf pesticides. In fact, we have Q&A about all these subjects we've been talking about. We have science abstracts about pesticides and how they're harmful to kids. We have a sample no pesticides policy that
For
any
a school board,
any school board can adopt. And we have links to some professional training for groundskeepers so they can learn how to maintain beautiful property without using pesticides. All that on the ChildSafe School website. And again, that website is www.thechildsafeschool.org. That's going to do it for our show this week. On next week's show, we'll cover a few other environmental hazards that happen at schools, including LED lighting and artificial turf. So don't forget to tune in for that. Thanks to all of you who listen to and support this show. We really appreciate it. Patty and I will be back next week with another edition of Green Street. Thanks for listening.